Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker. And in this video I actually want to spend a little bit of time dispensing some advice for those of you who are at the very early stages of waking up from the Jehovah's Witness religion. Perhaps you've only just stumbled on my channel. Perhaps you've only just read Crisis of Conscience, or it could be that for the first time in your life, you're seeing things that disturb you or things just aren't making sense, and you're terrified of the path in front of you. Now, I have actually written a book precisely for people in your situation, and it is this book, How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses. You will excuse the shameless plug. It's just that I did spend obviously a lot of time working on it because it turns out there are a lot of ways that you can do this wrong, because I'm sure lots of you watching this, perhaps who have never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, will say, look, if it's not working for you, just leave. It's not complicated. But actually, it gets more and more complicated depending on how controlling and how abusive and how cult-like a group is, because the more controlling a group is, the more difficult the group will make it for people to leave, so that their lives can be effectively destroyed by leaving. Now, there are ways of getting out. Quite clearly, I got out and my life hasn't been destroyed. But there are ways of doing it wrong. And what's prompted this whole video is a question from one of you. Sabrina Smothers says, "Hey Lloyd, my boyfriend is in the process of waking up. Could you give me some advice on how to help him through this? He is really confused about his beliefs, telling me he sees himself as a regular Christian. I'm not. I'm a Wiccan, but I tend to think more like an agnostic person who believes a lot of JW teachings. He seems confused, but also scared. What can I do?" So I'm sure there is a story there. Particularly, I'm interested in knowing all about the Wiccan named Sabrina. I'm interested in knowing whether you're by any chance a teenager. But all jokes aside, it sounds like you are genuinely worried about your boyfriend. This, by the way, is a regular occurrence whereby witnesses will get into relationships with non-witnesses, even though they're not supposed to, even though they're not allowed to be unevenly yoked to non-believers. Whether that's quite what's happened here, I have no idea, but that's what it kind of sounds like. And obviously Sabrina is worried. She's seeing that her boyfriend is involved in something dangerous and is realizing that, and is understandably confused and scared. Now, I did actually make a video a number of years ago, 10 tips on how to leave Jehovah's Witnesses, which actually basically forms the basis of this book. This book is like the expanded version of that video. And it's probably worthwhile because obviously that's an older video and not many people will have seen it. And I thought, why not do this all over again so that new viewers of my channel, including Sabrina, including probably many others who won't have seen the older stuff. And maybe I've got more things to say that I didn't say in the original video, who knows? But let's just go through the list that I presented in that video. The 10 tips begin with tip number 1, the 3 R's: research, research, research. You cannot do enough research when you are extracting yourself from a controlling cult. The reason for that is that there is basically a battle going on in your head. There's a battle going on between common sense, reason and rationality, and dogma and fear and manipulation and nonsense. And it's quite conceivable that the manipulation and nonsense will prevail. It has done even in some people who have been out of the organisation for many, many years. They've ended up going back to Jehovah's Witnesses because the bad guys have won. The manipulation has won over the common sense and the rationality, because the common sense and the rationality has been under-equipped. It hasn't had the tools needed to combat the fear and manipulation and dogma. The way you give the good guys the weapons that they need to do their job, again referring to your brain as a battleground, which it is in this situation, is to supply them with the information they need so that they understand, so that you understand on a basic level that you've been lied to, that the Jehovah's Witness religion is wrong, it's man-made, it's false. Over 140 years, it's made prediction after prediction after prediction. They've all been wrong. It's kept coming up with new teachings. It's flip-flopped and gone back to previous teachings. It's a total mess. It's exactly what you would expect of any man-made religion. And there are countless examples throughout the organisation's history. If you especially consult the publications, which, by the way, are resource number one, Watchtower's own publications in giving your brain the information it needs. You cannot do this successfully without the research, and definitely consult the older publications. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should read 140 years worth of publications. I'm saying that when you encounter resources such as JW Facts, such as, and this is very important, Crisis of Conscience, those resources will point back to the publications. Don't just take their word for it. At least to begin with, cross-check where it says, oh, in this Watchtower it says this, or in this book, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, it says this. Try and find a copy and reassure yourself that you're not being lied to all over again. That's a crucial process. In fact, basically all of the other stages that I'm going to go through are effectively meaningless if you don't do that first stage, that first step. Research, research, research. Hopefully I have conveyed suitably how important that step is. The next step is to plan your exit strategy. It sounds, particularly in this instance of Sabrina's boyfriend, as though he might be, I'm guessing, young, and therefore in a situation where perhaps his family has a big influence on his life. Perhaps he's dependent on his family for financial support. Basically, the extent to which a person is enmeshed with Jehovah's Witnesses through their family and perhaps through their work will dictate how complicated it will be to extract yourself. So what you really need to do is sit down and think, where do I want to be 5 years from now? And plot out what steps are needed to get there. And realise it doesn't have to be 5 years, by the way. It could be 10 years. It could be 20 years. Presumably you'll want to do it sooner rather than later. But map out a strategy. So what some people do, for example, is they say, well, rather than disassociating myself and rather than disfellowshipping or getting disfellowshipped, I'm going to fade. And what that will involve is gradually going to less meetings and gradually doing less preaching so that the elders aren't aware of what's going on. And before they know it, I'm not there and they've not really noticed me just stop attending just like that. So that's essentially what fading is. I'm going to be honest, it doesn't always work, or at least it doesn't always work the way people hope it will work, because you can still be shunned by your believing friends and family just because you're bad association, you're no longer going to meetings, you're no longer preaching. And elders tend to think they still control you even years or decades into the future. So if you were to do something that could get you disfellowshipped in the future, you'd have to be really careful to make sure that the elders don't get to learn about that through your friends and relatives. So it's a bit of a dilemma, really, as to whether you go for the fading or you go for the hard kind of I'm getting out of here disassociation path. Only you can really choose based on your circumstances what you go for. But I think in most cases there's something to be said, particularly for young people who are heavily involved with their believing families. I think there's a case to be made for trying to do it as gradually as possible. Point number 3 on the list was protect privacy online. It's obviously online on the internet where you are presumably going to be doing most of your digging, unless you have, a library like this that you can consult. Realistically, you're going to want to be looking at YouTube videos. You're going to want to be visiting JW Facts. You might even want to participate in XJW online groups, such as on the XJW Reddit. In fact, I would recommend that you do get involved on the XJW Reddit for reasons I'm going to go into. All of this obviously leaves an online trail so that if someone else accesses your device, they might be able to see your history. I'm not going to go into a lengthy list of all the different ways someone can find out what you're doing online. Hopefully, if you're a young person, you'll know what I'm talking about, and you'll know of ways that you can, at least to some extent, cover your tracks so that it's harder for witness family members in particular to find out what you're doing and make an already bad situation even worse. Building a team is point number 4. And I guess what I really mean by build a team is re-establish your community. And you can do that even when you're still inside Jehovah's Witnesses. You can think, right, I'm a human being. Human beings need community. They need friends. They need people they can rely on. They're not very good at being on their own. How do I start planning for the fact that at some point in the future, I'm very likely to be shunned by all of my believing friends and relatives? And the way you do that is by getting involved, perhaps in a local sports team. Maybe there's a community initiative that you can get involved with. Maybe there's a walking group. Maybe you could be more welcoming and more sociable just with people at work who you've previously been kind of warding off as a Jehovah's Witness because they're worldly and they're bad association. Start forging ties with these people, if they're decent people, of course, because you're going to need as large as possible a social network once you're on the other side. Again, you will know what's available in your local community, in your particular circumstances. Try and build a team to the extent that you are able. Point number 5, be careful with Jehovah's Witness friends. Let's say Elder Jim, who's been your buddy or your family's buddy for years or even decades, says, actually, why don't we go for a coffee? I notice you've been distant recently at the meetings, or I notice you've been missing meetings recently. Why don't we just nip over to Starbucks and we'll have a good old chat? And you think, well, it's Elder Jim. I can just be open with Elder Jim because he's a friend. He's been in our family for years. He's totally going to understand where I'm coming from with my doubts and with my reservations. Do not say anything to Elder Jim. Do not think that he is going to just reject all of his responsibilities and all of his duties as an elder and make an exception just for you. I've been an elder. Trust me, this is how it works. An elder's loyalty is first and foremost to the organisation. Doesn't matter how much of a friend you think they are. If they sense that you are in spiritual danger, things are going to start going sour very quickly. So don't assume that just because it's someone you've known for years, and it doesn't have to be an elder, it could just be someone else at the congregation. Don't assume they're going to be on your side. Don't assume they're going to just drop everything and make an exception for you and be perfectly fine with the fact that you no longer believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are God's one and only true organisation. That is not how it works. And if you go around sharing your doubts without any kind of filter, things again will quickly escalate, or could quickly escalate. It's best, if you can, to avoid completely sharing your doubts with believing Jehovah's Witnesses, especially elders. Try and do that instead with other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are going through the same thing. On a similar note, point 6 is be realistic about your family. And this is tricky. I've talked about friends in the congregation. When it's your family, things are a little bit more personal. And of course, you're not going to want them to waste their lives in a cult, especially if it means them shunning you once you leave. So it's perfectly understandable that you're going to want to salvage them in some way. There's nothing wrong with trying. It's just that you need to be realistic. You have arrived at this stage where you can see the organisation for what it really is through a particular series of events, through a particular mental and emotional journey that they haven't been on. And they are more than likely at a completely different stage in life. And it's frankly naive if you were to assume that just by showing them something or just by revealing a discovery that you've made, a switch is going to go in their heads and they will immediately be right up to speed with where you are. It's just not how it works. Believe me, I've tried. I have been that naive. With my father, didn't work at all. Obviously, there are always going to be exceptions depending on how firmly entrenched someone is in the organisation, to what extent they are a devout believer. But by and large, if they take their faith seriously, there is no magic bullet that's going to wake them up. And that's an important thing that you need to come to terms with early on. Now, if it's your husband or your wife, it's probably more pressing, you could argue, that you are open with them and that you have conversations with them, because you are a couple. You need to be able to make it through another, goodness knows how many decades together. It would be very difficult to do that if you were completely at loggerheads in terms of your beliefs. So it's understandable that things are more serious when it's your husband or your wife that you're thinking about, all I would say is be patient. Be as patient as possible, and remember that if it is your husband or wife, they are going to have reasons to want to salvage you. So in other words, you don't have to go chasing them around, showing them crisis of conscience or showing them whatever. Wait for them to come to you. And when they come to you, they will have an argument or a reason why you should return to Jehovah. Listen to their argument, listen to their reasoning patiently, and explain to them sincerely what your thoughts are. Sincerity is key. If they can see that this is what you genuinely believe and that what you sincerely think, and you're not trying to manipulate them, it's just a genuine difference of opinion, and they are presenting you with information that is completely unpersuasive, who knows, maybe that will make a difference, especially as that situation repeats itself over and over. But again, you need to be realistic and not expect that just because you've left, your husband and wife is going to leave as well. It happened for me, it's happened for others, but I also know of cases where it hasn't happened and things have ended very tragically in divorce, which gets incredibly messy if there are children involved, which I won't go into in this video. Again, I do deal with it a little bit in the Escape book. Point number 7, get support. Try to find, depending on your locality, this may be easy or it may be very difficult. Try to find professional counselling and therapy, because you are being subjected to profound forces. You are in the midst of, again, this mental battle that is raging in your head that could have profound consequences for you moving forward in life. Again, I'm not saying that it's going to mess everyone up to such a profound degree, but you just never know to what extent anxiety and fear and the sense of loss will impact on your life moving forward. And if you feel as though you simply cannot cope, it's all too much, you can't find a way out, you feel helpless, find a therapist, find a counsellor. They are trained in methods of dealing with what you're going through. They may not all be familiar with cults, and perhaps you can help educate them in that regard, but they will all be familiar with what to do when someone is dealing with loss, when someone is dealing with anxiety, when someone is dealing with depression, and they will have techniques that can help you navigate your way through that. Point number 8, take your time. So I mentioned before about an exit strategy. Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? The danger is that you could be so desperate to get out and so desperate to experience freedom for yourself that you do things too hastily, or you do things in a way that make things more problematic in the long term. So again, it's about being strategic. It's about being patient. There's that scripture, cautious as serpents, innocent as doves. You have been dealt a very bad hand in life by being caught up in a cult. It could be worse, by the way. You could have been born in a war-torn country, or you could have been born with a serious life-threatening illness. It's not the absolute end of the world. Nevertheless, you've been given a bad situation and you need to get out of it in the optimum way, in the way that is going to work best for you long term. And Unlike with the Jehovah's Witness religion, where you have this constantly ticking Armageddon clock, oh no, Armageddon's coming any moment, quick, we need to do this, 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 and this. It's different when you wake up. You get to take a breath, take a step back, evaluate the situation, and do things at your own pace. No one's rushing you. I'm not rushing you. Nobody's rushing you. You do things at your own pace and take your own sweet time. Point number 9. Not all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are your friends. I mentioned earlier about seeking out XJW Reddit, the subreddit there, going on Facebook and trying to establish connections. I mostly talked before, when I was talking about building a team, I mostly talked about doing that in the community, but the same applies to building a team of other XJWs who have shared your experience and can fully empathize when you're expressing to them the various problems that you're having to navigate. But that comes with a caveat, because it's true that not all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are frankly friend material. Just because I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness doesn't mean I'm a decent guy. Hopefully I am a decent guy, but you get my point. If you can be an awful Jehovah's Witness, if you can be an antisocial, mean, unkind Jehovah's Witness, and presumably you can think of some examples in your congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses who are like that, then you can also be a mean, unkind ex-Jehovah's Witness. If that awful Jehovah's Witness, let's say elder at your Kingdom Hall, were to wake up, he wouldn't suddenly get all of these fantastic qualities and his personality would just become wonderful. He'd still be an asshole. So bear in mind that when you encounter ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not like just because you have the same stamp in your cult passport, you're all going to be fantastic people. It just doesn't work like that. And I've included this on the list because I made that mistake when I was first waking up. I just assumed that almost anyone I encountered on forums, etc., would just be these wonderful people and we would all get along famously. It's just not how it works. And brace yourself for lots of examples of infighting between former Jehovah's Witnesses. Unfortunately, this is a very damaging cult, the Jehovah's Witness organization, and it messes with people. And it gives people lots of anger, lots of resentment. Some people are able to channel that anger and that resentment in a productive way, perhaps through activism, or perhaps through any number of ways. They see that something bad has happened and they think, how can I turn a negative into a positive? Not everyone sees things that way. Some people have been screwed over and they want to see the world burn. And that applies, unfortunately, to some XJWs. So don't expect all XJWs to be wonderful. Oh, we're all going to go for picnics together and it's going to be fantastic. Yes, you will go for picnics, and yes, you will have amazing experiences with other XJWs. Just don't expect that that's going to happen with everyone who's an XJW. Point number 10. Expect doubts and flashbacks. This is an important point. Something very profound has happened to you. You have had effectively your brain hijacked. For a period in your life, whether it was weeks, whether it was months, whether it was years, whether it was decades, you have not been in full control of your brain. And that is not something where you can just turn on a sixpence and everything's going to be fantastic. You're going to have full control of your brain again, and it will be as though nothing ever happened, everything's going to be swell. That's very unrealistic and naive to expect that you're never going to have flashbacks, you're never going to have doubts. Oh, am I really doing the right thing? Have I been manipulated by apostates? Have I been taken in by their lies? Did I fall for it? Oh, I can hear thunder in the distance. Is that Armageddon coming? Don't hate yourself for having those thoughts. It's perfectly normal. Again, this is programming that the cult has embedded deep in your brain, and you can't just lose it overnight. In fact, I argue in my book that to a certain extent, it's always going to be there. I think it's still there in my brain to at least some extent. The question is, how well will you manage it? How well will you force this kind of dark, fearful part of your brain into submission so that it's no longer impacting your life in a negative way? And to a degree, it's not about purging this side of your brain. It's not about purging this side of your personality. It's about reconciling yourself to it. It's about embracing it. It's about realizing that you are who you are as a person because of the experience you've been through. So if you'd never been a Jehovah's Witness, you would be unrecognizable as a person from who you are now. So as bad as it was, and you were right to get out of it because you were being lied to and you were being manipulated, it happened. And it's something that you can take ownership of and realize that you are a better, stronger, wiser person for having gone through that experience. So when I say expect doubts and flashbacks, it's not just be aware of the fact that you're going to have doubts and flashbacks. It's don't hate yourself for having them and realize that it's natural. It's perfectly normal. Given how invasive this cult has been with your brain, it's normal to have those issues. And really and truthfully, you'll never be entirely without them. It's purely a case of reconciling yourself to your past and embracing the JW side of yourself so that you can move forward together in freedom of mind. So yeah, that takes us to the end. That's the end of the list. I've run out of advice for you. Hopefully some or all of that will have been helpful to you, Sabrina, or Sabrina's boyfriend, whoever's watching this. Indeed, to the rest of my viewers. Again, basically all of this is summarized in this particular book. It's on Amazon, it's on Kindle, there's also an audiobook version. But if you can't be bothered getting the book, then at least I've summarized it for you here in this video and again in the earlier video. But that's pretty much everything I have for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.